So we've known each other for a number of years, and I have to say that up to about the time you arrived at EMA, people looked at regulation as sort of an imposed societal activity, but you've been encouraging the industry and others to see it as something which is adaptive and changing. And I think it's fair to say that these newer approaches, you've heard some of that today, have become part of the way you've changed regulation. But I just don't know, where are we with this adaptive pathways and adaptive procedures?
Yeah, thank you, Trevor. First, I have not changed the regulation. I certainly encourage a change that has to come. I don't know if the adaptive approach is the right one, is the final one. However, we understand that on top of the current golden standard, which is represented by the current phase 1, 2, 3 trial and all what you know very well, and on top of the randomized clinical trial, we know that some development now need to explore other way to gather the evidence, to generate the evidence, and to evaluate the evidence. I can name very easily the rare diseases, the smaller population, difficult population to address, like children, like pregnant women, like elderly population where you have a concomitant other treatment. That's why we have to explore other way. Where are we? We ran the pilot, 62 proposal, 17 has been in some way accepted, and 7 are now undergoing this pathway.
And this is where the agency really is trying to help the person who applies to understand what would be an acceptable accelerated pathway. It's not just yes or no. It's an involvement.
Exactly. So, as you know, the pillar of these are first to define that we are addressing uncontroversial medical need. Second, that we have we can expect that some specific population may really benefit of this innovation early without waiting too much the traditional development. And therefore, we are sure that the benefit risk will be higher, not lower, because we are addressing something very specific. And we, of course, we have to really plan to generate the evidence in the post-marketing. This is the other pillar.
In the
so-called real-world evidence, real life, real clinical setting. And here comes a lot of criticism and comes a lot of unanswered questions, which are exactly how we can be sure that we generate that evidence eventually, and if the evidence will not show what was promised, how we can withdraw, mitigate, limit, which we don't think with the current tools kit we have for pharmacovigilance is an issue. But still there are...
But we heard one of the panel say just now that there was a concern that if you let it out too soon, then you don't know whether there's going to be some side effects. And yet the amount of data you get from 2,000 or 3,000 patients very often at phase 3 or whatever is not necessarily addictive. Do you as a regulator have this, this concern when you're going to sign off on the dossier to say, well, I'd like to get it out much faster and get the real world data, but I better wait because I better know more about...
Yeah, thank you, Trevor. Let me expand on that. Of course, we know that not each and any development is suitable to go this way. As I said, you have to address uncontroversial medical need, which means that when you set the benefit risk on a very limited set of observation, you are certain enough that you are not lowering the standard. We also know as well that any randomized clinical trial, any design, leave you with some uncertainty. The level of uncertainty in smaller population may pretty much allow smaller observation to have the same level of uncertainty. What I think will be very robust is the generation, the planning of the generation of the additional evidence you need afterwards. With this example, might benefit also any traditional development. I just give you an example. Has been mentioned right now the Vioxx.
Yeah.
Okay, after 20 years, we now know that many painkillers are linked to some cardiac side effects. Well, if this is planned in a different way, we might not have to wait 20 years, even if that medicine has been developed under the golden standard of randomized clinical trial. So I think the planning of the post-marketing, we just closed a meeting with the big data at the EMA, mm-hmm. And I think also industry is a little backward like us, in really benefiting, understanding how to use them, where you are the reliable source, how we can manage that evidence, how we can generate and drive that evidence to put.
What has concerned me for a number of years is companies who fail to go and get expert views from EMA and FDA, of course, or having got them, choose to ignore them because it's either too expensive for the small company or they just don't believe it's science. And I think it's true that 40% of products fail at phase 3 because they just didn't go and sit down and carefully listen and get advice. Now, they may not agree with all the advice, but that's the way it's going to be in regulation. So,
I think you already more or less say that the figures behind this. We published something quite recently that 80% of the company who access the scientific advice and follows the indication succeed.
80%?
85%. As opposite to the 42% who doesn't follow, doesn't listen, doesn't follow.
And many of you know I'm very much involved in investing in biotech and life sciences. In fact, this week we're floating our new Arix Life Sciences Fund. And I won't touch a company unless they've gone and got that advice, because it's very important they listen.
And in Europe even more, because we offer also the joint advice with HTA bodies.
Yeah, I'm going to come to that, because I think that's where some controversy as to whether it's your role to be involved in pricing. But let's come to that shortly. I got these data about Prime. Now this is slightly different, isn't it? This is where you're trying to say, let's identify real areas, like we heard from the accelerated access from Sir John earlier, and let's give them some priority. That's the idea, is it?
Yes. The idea of Prime is exactly to identify very early, as early as possible, those promising development, those promising new medicines, always for, of course, addressing severe unmet medical need.
And the data I'd got here was that, out of something like 50 applications, 10 had been granted. This by June, this earlier data now. And some weren't relevant and so on. But I guess a lot of people would say, well, I think my new drug should be, in that category. So how do you make the judgment of what really is a priority?
Well, the priority, as I said, first priority is to, we have 2 points of access. One very, very early for very, let's say, inexperienced developers, like academia, small, micro enterprises, where really the risk of failing in the design is high, and that will be a shame to fail because of design and not because it's the wrong project. Mm-hmm. How we detect? Well, I think it's clear enough how we can define an unmet medical need when there is no option or whether there is an orphan designation. What we teach them is to access the many ways they have to undergo to go to a market, the full market authorization, which is the pediatric committee, the orphan designation,
the routes,
whatever it is. The benefit of this is that we appoint, and we try to appoint very early, the rapporteur, all the team to assist. This will generate a lot of benefit. First, we can grant an accelerated review. We can plan in our network. We are running out of experts. We are more and more having a workload process. And we have to access different, continuously changing set of experts. For us, this is a head planning of the best possible assessment team. If the Brexit will happen, we will lose quite few very good experts.
Then let's turn to Brexit, because everybody wants to know about this. So
it's my fault that I named.
I was very fortunate to be one of the team that attracted your organisation here to London. There was a big competition from different member states. Somebody wanted the banks, that was Germany. Somebody wanted the Interpol, and we wanted to have the agency. And it's been an absolute jewel in our crown, and as an industry. As we understand it, as I understand it at least, it would be impossible for, if we're out of the EU, for an EU institution to be based in the UK. It'll have to go.
Trevor, this is the only answer I don't have, only question I don't have a real answer. Has been said everything and the exact opposite. Mm-hmm. Where the political final decision scenario will land is very difficult, it's unpredictable.
Because we haven't even got to the point of
I
doing
only have a sure answer,
yeah.
Which is that everybody granted me uncertainty to the last minute.
So the point being that, it seems inconceivable to me that any other member state would allow it to continue in London if we're not part of the EU, because of the number of jobs and dependents, and just having that institution in your own city is an economic benefit to whichever member state. I mean, it's been argued, you just have an official office in Brussels and we still keep it in London. I would love that, but it doesn't seem a practical proposition. But more than that, one of the things that you've brought EMA and yourself to this is this pan-European approach to getting approval rather than a two-tier approach. And that's dependent upon the people in your organisation. I think you've got about 800 people, I don't know.
Yeah, 800. Yeah. 900.
And, if they all have to go, I'm sure they won't all go. And we're going to be into a huge problem of, uncertainty, and it'll be inefficient until you can recruit the new cadre of people.
Yes, that is my highest concern, is that I'm flattered that so many different nation and city wants us. However, my only concern is workability in a place where I can work. Will be pretty much a family decision for the people to move.
Exactly.
Because many of my staff members are settled down more than 10 years. So they might have children, they perceive themselves as British. They might like or not, but so yes, my concern is to lose experts, to lose staff.
And depending upon where, assuming it happened, and where it would go, because some would say, well, I don't want to go there. I don't mind going here, but I'm not going to go there. So that's the uncertainty factor.
It's like we have a task force to try to address all these for the preparedness of these, where one of the concerns is how we can cope with the loss of...
So that's very encouraging that actually, this is not something you're saying, if it happens, I'll do something about it. There's an active discussion going on now about
yes, we are trying to monitor the workload, to monitor who can do what if happen the worst. Yeah. And we are prepared for scenario A to Z.
And of course,
now we are starting ZA, ZZ.
But I mean, obviously, right now you've got a situation where people like Norway and Switzerland and so on have a relationship to the EU process, although it's not internal. So there could be
that's
even
way much above me.
Ah, yes. But that is that a possible potential that although the office may not be here with all that uncertainty and transition, there may well still be a way that Britain can help and be part of some broader thing. Is that still open, do you think?
Are you asking me if I like or if I can do something? No, it's much beyond my power.
Right, well, let's turn to the health technology assessment. Now, I happen to have here a piece of European law. It's Regulation 726 of 2004, if anybody would like to know that. Then it says, in the interest of public health, authorization decisions shall be taken on the basis of the objective scientific criteria of quality, safety, and efficacy to the exclusion of economic considerations. So you should have nothing to do with the price of medicines.
And in fact, we don't have to.
But you are involving HTA.
We won't have to do. That is a remit of member states. We don't even want to. What is our role? And I think it will be a growing role, we like it or not. When you say the efficacy, there are many ways to describe efficacy. Can be something very close to effectiveness.
Yes.
Can be just something that is equally effective to something else. That is the boundary we don't want to cross. And the benefit risk can be limited, can be larger, can be more confidence. Well, for the benefit of everybody, if we can determine how much is more beneficial or is beneficial, a new option for patient, I think will be helpful for the patient, will be helpful for the developers who eventually can generate or is their choice. We just propose to have at the same time two community, the health technology assessment and the regulators, telling what is the evidence we have to generate for our purpose, and listen at the same time what is the evidence they expect at the same time for them. And is that
what EU Net HTA is about? This is the joint working, is it?
That is the approach. The Commission fostered the aggregation of HTA authorities around Europe. There are, as you can expect, as many different view and approaches as many authorities we have.
Well, I think that's
because
the
they
worry.
operate in different systems.
Last week, the commissioner for one of the commissioners at Brussels said that he was concerned about the expense of medicines across Europe and would like to see a commonality of HTA across Europe. I could read that as common pricing in Europe, which would be a real concern to us as an industry.
Yeah, well, to me, there are still three layers. One is regulation, one is the health technology assessment, and one is the pricing.
Okay.
I see a lot of scope to merge, and I don't want to scare my colleagues of HTA by merging, because when I say merge, they already see they have a badge of EMA, they come there. No, merging means to have at the same time in parallel rather than in sequence, each one in its own remit. And our pilot showed that we can stay to our role without jumping in each other's role to really generate or foster the generation of evidence that suit both the community.
Let me move to the involvement of patients in both drug development but also in decisions that regulators have to take. We've always talked about involving patients as if, we'll involve a patient, rather than really involving patients in the system. I think at EMA you've already gone further than that. You actually have a very positive way of including patients in your regulation.
Yeah, I think we started progressively to have patients at any stage, in any committee. They have their own working group. Our belief is that when is at any stage, because from the very early stage of the clinical trial designing, setting what is the real endpoint that matters them could be valuable. In some diseases more.
So in the protocol design,
can be very valuable to
I've talked to a patient group recently who said that's absolutely incredible, but it has all the things about pain. But as far as I'm concerned, I want mobility, and it's not even the protocol, you know.
Yeah.
So, yeah, getting them involved in protocol development, but then how do you involve them in the decision about whether risk-benefit and so on?
Well, so far they are not yet in the final committee, the CHMP, so they don't have the final say. Their influence is increasing. Public hearing with their presence in each and any committee, in any discussion, I think is valuable, is contributing. With the adaptive approach, we want to have the patient, and the adaptive pathway will happen only if you have a multi-stakeholder staying in all the life cycle.
Yeah. So let me move to then data sharing and transparency. There was a time not long ago, maybe a year or so ago, where your agency said, we are going to release all this data that we've got, clinical data. And I think some of us in the industry were horrified by the fact that that could lead to some chaotic situation where some activist might interrogate some data, pick out some juicy little bit and then publicize it, and patients would then stop taking their medicine or the share price would jump. I think you've moved on from there, but so what's the current situation about data transparency?
Well, as you know, we started the 20th of October to publish the data of the first 2 medicines approved by us. We made clear that we only publish the data we use for the evaluation. We redact what is regarded as commercially confidential.
That was that itself was controversial in what is commercially confidential.
We never came to a real clarification from the legislation. The interpretation leaves a lot of room for interpretation. We propose to the sponsor our reduction. If they see that something can be damaging there, they have the possibility to propose
to make the case.
To make the case. Yeah. Of course, we take the final decision, and we take the responsibility for the consequences if we really are revealing something that is detrimental for the company. However, it seems that we are getting to a point where people are trying to pick, people who, bad intention to pick something, to make a case artificially, I mean, doesn't need this kind of data. They can do
it anyway.
They can do anyway. They can try to generate distrust. They can make meta-analysis where you know that you can demonstrate that something is black or something is white.
And then we had a dialogue with some other companies, and many of them now set up a safe harbor like the Wellcome or Yale, where they would judge whether or not access to patient-level data was a scientifically valid proposal, and then do the data and bring it back.
But by the way, we are not yet at the level of individual patient data, because the anonymization is another.
Regrettably, totally running out of time, but I noticed that when I was coming up here today, I read an article that you've just released this EU medicines portal. This is it says it eventually will replace Udra and so on. So this is a very new initiative to actually let patients, anybody, see what's happening and what the statistics are. That's live now, is it?
Yes, it's live. It's another way to try to build trust and to encourage and to show how we operate. And I think it's mutually beneficial.
I don't know if you've all seen that, but it's actually live. The EU medicines portal for patients, HSCPs, academia and so on. Probably well worth seeing what your product looks like on there, actually. So, lastly, you and I have spent time talking about the US regulations and the European regulations, and sometimes it's frustrating to the industry because we have to do something rather different for FDA than EMA. So, is there a hope that we might get more harmonization going forward?
Well, in Italy we say that the hope is the last to die. So progress has been made, I think, steadily. The level of cooperation, the last 5 years, has generated a lot of mutual trust at the operational level. To cut short for the respect of time, at the high level, when we were talking among ourselves with the commissioner, we all agree. Then you go down to the operational level. They say, yes, but our jurisdiction, yes, but the module, that, but 5 years of cluster, a really daily meeting with the FDA has generating daily. We have cluster with daily meeting, no less than 3 to 5 daily meeting with FDA on many issues.
Good.
And that's
so this is a very active program.
More than any other initiative. Yeah. Then we need now the political level. We operate in different jurisdictions. Price and the way of pricing is driving a lot how the regulation and how something can be addressed.
We shall see what Mr. Trump does. So,
let's see.
Out of time, Professor Rasi, thank you very much for being with us. Thank you for being so very open as well. We really appreciate that. And I do hope we all stay in London. Thank you very much.
Also, very good.
Great.